Welcome back to a brand new episode of the MMA Beat. It is Thursday, December 14th, 2017. Hello again, everyone. I'm Mario Helwani back inside our New York City studio. And how about this for the second straight week? The A-Team in the house. This is big. This is massive news. That is Luke Thomas of SiriusXM and MMAfighting.com. That is the man in the hat, Chuck Mindenhall of The Ringer and MMAfighting.com. And, of course, that is the man in the shirt, Jeff Wagenheim of The Washington Post. Okay, guys, last week, just a few hours after our show, some massive news broke.
Typical.
It used to happen a lot more often back in the day, so can't really complain. Georges St-Pierre officially vacated his title. He was the middleweight champion for just 33 days, and the UFC put out this statement saying that because of his health, he's decided to move on. As a result, Robert Whittaker became the undisputed middleweight champion, and at UFC 221, February 10th in Perth, Western Australia, it's going to be Robert Whittaker defending that title against Luke Rockhold. So let's talk about GSP first. We talked about it a little bit, but at the time, last week on the program, we weren't quite sure if he was going to vacate the title, if the Whittaker-Rockhold fight would be for the undisputed belt, but now we know it's 100% official. GSP vacates the title a little over a month after beating Bisping. How do we feel about it a week later?
It's a complicated issue. There's a lot to unpack here. I basically don't like, okay. I think everybody liked that he made the decision quick. He didn't waste any time once he basically had medically sufficient information to make an informed choice. Okay. But, our old colleague, Michael David Smith, who is now at Pro Football Talk.
Yes.
He was tweeting about this yesterday. We were talking about, he was covering some tweet about, someone had written an article, forgive me, I can't remember the name, suggesting that GSP had really crippled the middleweight division with his acts. Now, I don't know if that is hyperbole or not, but Michael David Smith, MDS, wrote, look, I think the sport is moving in a direction where people just want to see two people of relatively equal size in a matchup. They don't really necessarily have the need for divisions anymore. And I don't know that I really agree with that, but I definitely think that's true. Whether you can like it or you can hate it, I think it's moving in that direction. And so you can be mad about whether or not this preserves the architecture to which the sport has been guided at this point or not, but we're definitely moving away from it. So it's like, how mad do you want to get about some kind of inevitability? I don't know.
It's really strange. I mean, you're mentioning basically matching people who are the same in these one-off situations. To me, that is complicated because we have seen it at the guys who are at the top, but it's strange because when you have prospects, you have guys coming up, which is almost, that's the bulk of the UFC, is guys who are just not known. They're trying to get a name. And it's very tough because entering some kind of structured system like that, like they want to be able to get into a fold where they're then going against guys who are ranked above them. I know the rankings, you could say what you want about them, but everybody kind of knows generally where guys are at. You don't have to see the UFC's official rankings to know where guys are at, but you're trying to gun for these guys. And I feel like at some point if you're just doing it the way that you're talking about, it loses the structure enough where I'm not sure if that's, I honestly don't think that would be a good thing overall because they've spent so much time making this more into a sports league. I know it's not a league, but a sports league-esque setup where guys are ranked and guys are doing, guys are gunning for the next thing, guys are trying to get championships. And I think at some point, all of that will get lost. And to me, that kind of, that's hard to fathom, that they're just, forget about all that. We're just going to start matching people like that. So in some cases, yes, but on whole, I would say that I can't wrap my mind around that concept.
Yeah, I don't know that the sport as a whole is moving in that direction, but I think that there certainly are some segments of it. Some of the people who have the sway, the people who can call their own shots at the top of the sport, the biggest stars, can do that kind of thing. Personally, with Georges St-Pierre, I have no problem with what happened here. To me, getting a championship belt is an achievement. And so the fact that he was in position, as a guy who did not lose the welterweight belt, he stepped away from the sport. He surrendered the belt voluntarily then. He came back and he was given the opportunity to go for a championship belt, which is, to me, a valuable thing, and he achieved that goal. I don't think that the person who wins a belt has to defend the belt. He just can't hold on to the belt. I think that if you win the belt and you say, well, okay, that was a really great achievement, now I'm stepping away, I don't have a big issue with it. I understand how there can be some long-term ramifications, but I don't think this is the kind of thing that's going to happen that often. I mean, maybe, we might see this with TJ Dillashaw. If he goes down and fights Demetrius Johnson, Is he really going to stay and he wins the belt, is he really going to stay at 125 pounds? Probably not. So he might relinquish it too.
In his case, it was almost like we were on a detour. As soon as Michael Bisping got the belt, right, it seemed like the whole division was on a detour. Oh, wait, we didn't plan for this. Now we're going on some side road. Let's see where this leads. Well, it went to Dan Henderson, and then it ended up with GSP, which everybody knew might be a second detour. We knew that this might be a second. Well, you know, there's the main traffic with Whittaker and all those guys who've been waiting for their shot. And we're that much further off. And everybody kind of knew, I mean, we talked about this a lot, that there was a great possibility that it was going to be one and done. That's what made the fight very weird, because there was you didn't know the future behind it, but you could kind of guess at the future, and it was messy. And I feel like that's one of those situations where, well, here, the scenario played out. It was great to see Georges St-Pierre back. It was great to see him win it. It's cool that he was timely in his decision, like you said, but it's still messy. It's still very weird. And it feels like now you have to say, like, okay, we had our drunk weekend, now it's back on the main road, you know?
The thing for me, I just am having a hard time reconciling with it. I don't know what the right answer is. I really, really don't. I'm just trying to noodle it through. But I just remember so distinctly everybody considering it a breath of fresh air circa 2006 when the UFC was saying, like boxing has no steward. There's no steward of this sport. We are the stewards of MMA, and we're going to show you how this is done. We're going to make contenders matter. We're going to make divisions matter, because boxing never did. And over time, it just feels like, whether by hook or by crook, I don't really know all the mechanisms. I think partly the fact that fighters have, at least the elite fighters, as Jeff noted, have more leverage now than ever. It feels like we're just slowly morphing into it. We had all these debates about how we don't do business that way, and that is exactly the way we are headed. Is this an inevitability or a conscious choice? I don't know, but I just can't understand how we could spend so many years saying that's not what we do, and now we are running headfirst.
But you realize what the difference is, though, right? I mean, that was a different era, different ownership. This ownership group only cares about what happens on that night.
But then, so then we have to ask.
Future plans be damned.
Fair enough. And they have a debt load they have to finance too, which also plays into it.
And a TV deal. They want the sexiest night possible, right?
I get it. And again, maybe it's not the end of the world. Boxing's doing great. Maybe it's not so bad. But my only point being is, if that's the case, then who is the steward of MMA? Because it's not them anymore.
But there is something to be said for him relinquishing the belt almost immediately, because look what happened to featherweight. Look what's happening to lightweight. We've got basically an absentee champion, and both of we had one in featherweight until the UFC finally took that belt away. And now we have one in lightweight. To me, that's the unhealthier scenario. I understand that there are some downsides to what GSP is doing, but I feel it gets counterbalanced by the fact that he wins the belt. Great, I got my achievement. Now I'm gonna give it back. And there's a guy there. They already had this. If they didn't have an interim champion, like, I'm always the guy that hates the interim belts.
I was gonna ask that. Does it soften the blow? The fact that there is an interim
in a kind of way, because otherwise, what would be happening? We'd be waiting for this fight in Perth to crown a champion. Well, we already have a champion, so I mean, in a way, it does. And I guess it kind of is the first time one of the first times I've ever felt like an interim belt may have been a good thing.
But you see, there's a difference, because like the first time he vacated the title, UFC 171, they have this vacant, belt, and you got two guys going in there for the title, right? Johnny Hendricks and Robbie Lawler. If you're someone who cares about, the history of the sport, the lineage remains. Now there's like a broken line, right? Anderson to Weidman to Rockhold to Bisping to GSP, and then it just goes to Whittaker. So I don't know, as like a stickler for that sort of stuff. Yeah,
it bothers me, but I feel like...
almost like I like the idea of a vacant title, and like we're fighting for the belt he once had, as opposed to saying like, hey, you're now the official champ, just like that.
I can get that argument. I mean, I'll go back on board to hating him for belts. I mean, I just thought maybe it was a little neater to not have to have a vacant belt, but I get that. I mean, there is something interesting when you say these two guys, neither one of these guys is the champion, but at the end of the night, one of them is going to be.
There's something like it's the same belt. There's the same belt that's continuing. Sorry,
I feel like there's just so much more smoke and mirrors these days, and like the dangling carrot that nobody can ever get. So there's a guy who's coming up, they're presenting him, he's coming up, he's got momentum, they're presenting him, and like, hey, he's vying for a title shot. There's a certain amount of people who put that into their mind, and they see him perform well, and they think, okay, now it's time for Sasha. And it just isn't that easy anymore. It's like that guy gets up there, the momentum, and then the champion, they may book over here, or he wants something different. It's just, it's a different model now. I feel like the guys at the top dictate a lot more what's happening, and you have obviously a new ownership group which is accommodating to a lot of that. I mean, obviously, I don't know how serious, maybe you know more than me, of Woodley and Nate Diaz or something like that, because to me, I'm like, if they make that kind of fight, they might as well just do away with the ring. They might as well just say, hey, guys, we're just going to book. Right. We think that we're going to go off of fans, but we're going to kind of do what we want on these fights.
A year and a half after the sale, we really do have to come to terms with the idea that this isn't the old UFC. The new UFC is trying to make the biggest fight possible on that night, and then they're going to worry about the repercussions later. Woodley Diaz is a perfect example of that. Alvarez McGregor.
That seems terrifying.
No, but that's the truth. I mean, have you seen anything that suggests otherwise?
You're not terrified by this?
Mayweather McGregor is aging so poorly for the UFC in the sense that, yes, they made a ton of money and it saved their year, all that stuff. But look what's happened now. All of a sudden, you're saying to yourself, oh, he made $100 million. Oh, look, we thought MMA was a big winner. Did MMA really win that night? And, of course, we could do a whole hour on Mayweather McGregor and the aftermath. But I'm just saying, I don't think Lorenzo makes that fight in 2009. I'm not sure if Lorenzo gives GSP that Bisping fight in 2010. You get what I'm saying? But this, Francis Ngannou, Stipe Miocic, did that fight really have to happen in Boston? Like, do they really need 2 title fights on that card, like a month after Francis fought? No, but they need to load the decks as much as possible. And as a result, you have issues like St. Louis that still doesn't have a main event, and that card's in less than a month. They may just bump one up, and depending on how the ticket sales go. So it's not the old UFC. And I think that this story, allowing GSP to do this, my quick take on it is GSP gamed the system. GSP found an opponent that he could beat with history attached to it, new weight class, all that stuff and more. He gamed the system. But if you just pin it on GSP, that's not fair. The UFC let him game the system, and that to me is the more interesting thing. They knew what he was doing,
everything you're
and
saying.
they let him do it.
Everybody suspected all of what you're saying. Everybody knew that. Everybody knew the scenario.
This is the crazy part to me. It's like if you look at a scenario now where when the UFC can take the entire MMA world and put it under its thumb, that's when they're like weight class, title contender, and the occasional, hey, here's Brock Lesnar or whatever. But generally speaking, they were very rigid because they had so much control. Now, when you see the fighters begin to assert themselves, that's when this entire creep towards the boxing model takes us in. But to your point, the UFC is assisting the fighters in that journey.
They waited for him.
It is shocking.
To suggest that GSP gamed the system almost makes it sound like the UFC was victimized here, but they're not. They were
willing participants.
They were part of it. And look, there's these guys are. This is what they want. This is what they want. They want, and the fighters. I don't blame GSP for doing what he did. I don't blame Conor McGregor for winning featherweight belt and never defending. People can blame these fighters for this, but it's ultimately the people who award the belts who have to say, hey, listen, you just won this championship belt. You need to defend that belt within this amount of time, or else we need to move on. And if they're not willing to do that, then it's on them.
It's funny that you mentioned it being terrifying. It's sort of like a rich man's strike force. The strike force back in the big problem with it is compared to the UFC always kind of had 5 steps ahead. You knew the 5 guys hovering in that space. You knew that this guy, if he wins, might be heading towards this guy. It kept playing forward. Strike force would just kind of have, well, this guy's going to fight him, and that's going to be a good fight. Who knows what happens afterwards? We'll just find out. That's kind of where we're at, which is really weird because I never liked, comparatively, like when you're taking the 2 sports, that was the worst part about Strikeforce. You wanted there to be some depth of what was going to happen, some forward thinking, some transparency in terms of what was going to happen. You never really had it. And if that's the model they're going to, I agree. It does seem terrifying because it seems like you lose interest on hold. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, oftentimes before we go on the air for the show, you'll say to us, okay, we're going to talk about such and such a fighter and what's next for that fighter. And often I'm thinking, well, if this were 5-6 years ago, the answer would be pretty crystal clear. We probably would all agree, or at least maybe we would have it down between 2 guys. But oftentimes, what's next for the fighter, there's so many different things to think about. Well, who merits that fight? Who's the biggest star? Who's going to draw the biggest pay-per-views? Like, there's so many different things. What quarter of the year is it in terms of how much they need to profit? I mean, there's so many different things that some of these questions become almost impossible to answer because of that.
There's a million monkey wrenches now, you know what I mean? Like there's so many guys, you're like, well, if we do this is a monkey wrench to this. It used to not be that way. It used to be a lot more streamlined, to be like you understood everything and it made sense. And I think that I think it was you who was mentioning, I feel like the UFC back in the day would kind of listen to social media a little bit. Whatever the outcry was, I felt like they kind of gathered that information and said, hey, this is what the people want. I feel like they really did that. I don't really feel like that's the case anymore.
So before this news came out, Dana White told reporters in Vegas that he would be, quote, super pissed if GSP never defended the title. After the fact, he's like, I'm not really all that mad. You know, who didn't see this coming? When he said the super pissed line, I was like, really? Like, you didn't see this coming, or you didn't know? To me, the fact that they explicitly put in his contract that he must defend the title against Whittaker said to me that they actually were afraid that this was coming or thought that this might come. Are you at all surprised, Luke, that he's kind of apathetic towards it all? Or is that just Dana White in 2017 when it comes to MMA?
I know. He says he's not checked out, and I guess he's not checked out. I'm sure he's working hard. That is, I mean, it's hard to even, it's not the same guy. Let's just be real. It's not the same guy as it used
2008, does he have an answer like
2008, man, he's beat red. He's drinking that smart water. That
Sport killer.
Right.
Yeah, he's turned,
You have a responsibility. Remember that press conference, Johnny Hendricks?
Dude,
you have a responsibility to this company.
Yeah, lit AF he used to be, and now it's like it's not even close to that. No, I mean I don't know what to make of this anymore because you know part of me feels like UFC is like left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. That the thinking is so short term that they're stumbling over themselves as they try to stumble to the next deadline itself. I don't have a strong sense other than he doesn't appear particularly fired up about much these days.
It's pretty funny because yesterday on New England radio up where I'm at, I caught an interview with him on the radio, and he's talking about he's like they're talking about Boston. You know, there's DJ guys who are just like they're zany, they don't know really what's going on, but they're just kind of taking stabs in the dark type of thing. But he was like, yeah, we haven't been to Boston in 2 years. We're excited to go up there, and I've already got tickets to the 76ers game on Thursday night, and plus the AFC Championship is going to be going on. You're like, he's talking about everything but his fight. I was like, this is bizarre, man. It was like he's talking about what a big weekend is going to be. We're just going to be part of it, you know. It just was different.
And so I'm wondering, so you mentioned about GSP, like the fact that he did this quickly, maybe softens the blow. It was pretty amazing. I didn't really see him get all that much hate for it. People were like, yeah, you know, all right, let's move on. That was nice.
GSP,
and all.
man, you know?
Yeah, I guess to a degree. And I'll ask you guys this impossible question. It's a question I asked John Danaher on Monday. Do you think if he didn't get sick, that he really would have defended the title, or do you believe that he never had any intention? You're shaking your head. You don't believe?
I don't think he did. I mean,
it's impossible to know, but
the fact is, I mean, what do you do? Like you go with sort of a hunch, or your hunch or your gut feeling. Maybe whispers going on. You just kind of draw your conclusion as to what somebody's thinking. We were just talking about how, you know, he gamed the system a little bit. Well, that's the way I saw it. He gamed the system. He saw Bisping. He's like, hey, I can get in here, win a second title, you know, all these things, and he did. And I just don't think he ever really contemplated, like, I'm going to deal with Whittaker. You know, I don't think that really was the case. I mean, I'm not saying he ducked him or anything like that, but I just don't think that he ever really had any true intention of
Does that make you feel differently about him?
No, not really, because we were on the show 3 years ago, you know, whenever it was 4 years ago, and I remember we were talking like, this is perfect for him to walk away. Yeah. Perfect for him to walk away. He's starting to take beatings and all this stuff. Truthfully, I didn't want to see him fighting guys like that. Honestly, I really don't. Like, that's not that. I know he looked very good in his return, but Michael Bisping, obviously at the tail end of his career, it was kind of a unique situation. Robert Whittaker, man, he's 20-something years old, and he's just a monster. Yeah. I don't really have big interest in seeing GSP get worked like that. I'd rather, if he's going to fight the monsters of a division, he did it in the welterweight division, where he belonged.
Done fighting entirely? Whew. I don't know. I think that I don't know that he has made a decision. I know he was on your show right after the fight, and he said that, and you always sort of think, well, he just doesn't want to reveal what his next call is. But I get the feeling that he's going to see how his body feels. He did take very seriously this whole idea of bulking up to to become a 185 pounder and all that. I mean, I don't think he's going to fight at that weight class. I think he would have to fight back in his old weight class, and if the right thing came along, I think if McGregor and him for a ton of money came together, I think he would take that. But he's not going to. But I also think that he also said, when you asked him about that, I'm not going to call out a smaller guy. So I think it would be up to the other guy to say, hey, this is the guy I want to fight.
Yeah, I don't think that's happening either. Luke, let me ask you about Whittaker Rockhold. Does it feel like a real title fight? Are you content with this solution to the GSP problem?
And as much as a solution is available, it's hard to get much better than this one. I mean, you can say whatever you want about Luke Rockhold, and the Michael Bisping win was legitimate. You know, whatever he took him lightly or not, Michael Bisping won. But the fact remains, I think, and there's plenty of evidence to suggest this, that Luke Rockhold might actually be the best middleweight. We don't know. Whittaker has a claim to that as well. We'll see if Chris Weidman can have a bit of a rebound. But the point being is there are very exciting fights between very elite guys. We were talking for a while how the top 10 at middleweight was pretty hot. Everything after that, not so much. Luke Rockhold, I thought, had a bit of a rough moment there against David Branch, but David Branch is super legit, and he made David Branch quit. Hard to do. Very hard to do. To me, Chris Weidman's win over Kelvin Gastelum, very, very impressive, but not on the same level, I think, as beating David Branch because he's a true middleweight. Not to say Kelvin Gastelum's not very talented. And I think also Yoel Romero obviously needs another win. So for me, it's like that is an excellent fight. It's a good way to get the division rolling with some meritocracy right away.
Right.
It's hard to do better.
It feels like we're picking up where we left off before that whole thing. But at the same time, obviously the new guy is Whittaker because he really wasn't in the conversation when back at UFC 199. He was still hovering it below the top 5. It was Romero and Jacare and guys like that who were all up there. And you look at who he's had to go through to get to this spot, and you think, okay, well, he knocked off guys within that top 5. So to me, in my mind, he should be there 100%. And then Rockhold, given the circumstances, and I agree with you, like he has rebounded with the victory over David Branch. In my mind, I feel like I still look at him like as one of those elite guys that you haven't seen enough of yet. So I feel like he's still there. In my mind, in a weird way, he's kind of still a champion because he did take that fight, no matter how we want to, slice it, against a guy he'd already beat very easily the first time. And, to wrap your mind around an opponent switch and go in there, I'm not making excuses for him, but imagine how hard that would be. You know what I mean? For a guy like that. So, I do put a tiny asterisk on that, but I feel like those two guys colliding right now, it just feels like we're picking up where we left off.
Yeah, I think it's a really good fight. The fact that it's happening in Perth is kind of awesome. It's going to make Whittaker, I mean, you've talked about this all the time, the Stipe Cleveland effect. That's going to be real exciting. And I think that I think that the GSP, if GSP were to take that fight and if that had happened up and down in Perth, that would be the wrong thing because you got your hometown hero facing a guy who, MMA fans love. This way, I think Luke Rockhold has a kind of the heel persona coming into your town to beat up your boy. And I think that kind of, inflates the fervor even more. So I think it's going to be fun.
I felt like he hasn't, he's just one of those guys who his grudge is very serious. His belt goes away and he can't get back.
Yeah.
And he's carried that the whole way, this cloud over him. And I feel like it's really weird watching him because it's almost a little bit of a downer to hear his interviews and stuff that. And I like Luke Rockhold. He's a very, very smart guy and all this stuff. So I feel like it's it's his chance to.
Well, he created this mess.
Of course.
It's amazing. Like, there are events, they come and go. Some will, be forgotten a couple weeks later. Like 199, like you said 199, right off the top of your head. Like that event, what happened in that main event, how it created this domino effect of craziness, right? I mean, the Henderson title fight and then the GSP thing and Rockhold just, getting so mad. And then it's just amazing what that one. So I feel like he's holding on to all this anger and this is his way of rectifying it.
The last thing about this on Luke Rockhold, we're sort of making it like, well, he's got this interesting story and it would be a nice fight against Whittaker and he probably maybe deserves it more than the other one. But you could debate whether or not Weidman gets it depending, based on how you want to look at their, one had a longer losing streak, but nevertheless, they're both off a rebound off a loss, right? So, but I also feel like the UFC sometimes wants to pick winners, and I think they feel like there's another level of celebrity, frankly, that Luke Rockhold might be able to attain if he can actually get a title and they can promote him and push him, that he was supposed to get after beating Weidman and got derailed.
So you think they want Rockhold to win?
I think they do. I think they would take it if Whittaker wins for a lot of other reasons, but I still think they kind of want to push Rockhold to the front of the line and see what happens.
I'm curious about that because him and Dana White haven't seen eye to eye. He's been very critical. In fact, he said recently that the UFC needs to stop promoting Dana more than the fighters. And remember they had that
Which I don't even understand.
Twitter exchange. What don't you understand? Like that comment?
What are they supposed to call it? The Luke Rockhold Tuesday night fights? Like, I don't...
I don't think he necessarily means that. Also, like looking for a fight and all that is kind of a. I mean, look.
I don't.
In this day and age, he's actually being promoted less than he was 5 years ago, right?
Yeah, I don't think that those things are. They don't need to include Dana. I understand that, but I don't. Like, if there's anything the UFC is doing these days, it's not promoting Dana ahead of fighters in some kind of way that they used to do, which was really
Sure.
bad. Now it's like, it's whatever.
Yeah, just curious if that's what they really, if maybe Whittaker is more of a
so,
team
I think
player.
he just needs to improve his mic skills a little bit. I mean, he's a good interviewer. You've interviewed him tons of times. There's times he says, and I've talked to him too. He's a very good speaker ultimately. He thinks things through. But on the microphone, for whatever reason, I feel like he kind of he comes up shy.
Yeah,
he comes up shy of like
he's
actually.
trying too hard.
Yeah.
By the way, go ahead.
I was going to say, actually, in person, he's quite friendly.
Sure.
Not that he's not friendly in interviews, but he's got a little bit of a chip on his shoulder that I think some people misinterpret as like, oh, he's a bitter, angry guy. Yeah. He's a competitive guy. There's a
How about that face, huh? I mean, those looks.
A little bit psychotic, though.
Yeah, he's a little psychotic.
But we like that in our
course.
fighters. By the way, speaking of Australia, Jeff, just wanted to ask you quickly about Mark Hunt. He has been cleared. He's officially cleared. He went through, all the tests that they asked him to. He went to Vegas, all that stuff. He's fighting Curtis Blades on this card. In hindsight, are you okay with how this played out, or him passing the test? Does that kind of, we spoke about, when this story first came out, is the UFC doing this because of the lawsuit, all that stuff? Are you okay with how this all played out, eventually with him getting cleared?
I guess my opinion is the same as it was when this first came out, which I believe was that I'm not sure what the motivation was behind the UFC doing it, but I feel like it's the right thing to do. If a fighter has exhibited some signs of concussion or something that some of the post-concussion symptoms, you can't put the guy into a fight until you've checked it out. And so I know that there were a lot of other things factors in there as to why the UFC might have done it with him as opposed to looked at somebody else, but I have no problem with that.
Yeah, that was, I mean, ultimately the same thing. I mean, I still feel like he raised his own red flags by just posting that piece. And I think, what are you supposed to do if you're the UFC in that position where a guy says he can't, remember things that happened yesterday? I mean, these are the red flags that you don't, especially in the hype for a fight. This is anti-hype. When you're saying things like that, it makes you queasy to watch a fight rather than be excited for it. So I feel like, given all those circumstances, I completely understand why the UFC did it, and they did the extra battery test in Vegas, right? So they found out that he's good to go, and if anything, it's like there's maybe a lesson to not go saying those things, to not say if that's not true, because I feel like he's backpedaled a little bit and acted as if that was a little bit misconstrued and all that stuff. But I'm like, well, just don't say things like that, because that's pretty serious. Obviously, in a sport like this and in football, and there's so much scrutiny on those types of things right now. It's just not a smart idea unless you're really exhibiting that.
You agree?
Yeah, I don't have much of a thing. I mean, the UFC has to, you can't run a fight organization and really say you're like, oh my God, I'm super interested in safety. If you help kids cross a street, then you're interested in safety. If you are a nurse, you are interested in safety and health. If you run a fight organization, you are affirmatively not. But you want to take some measures to ensure that the worst case scenario doesn't upend your business. I think, again, that's why they do work with USADA. In the event that somebody, God forbid, has a catastrophic injury or death, they can say, we did our homework, we can't prevent everything. With Mark Hunt, God forbid something had happened to him, someone would have gone right to that Player's Voice article and been like, this guy warned you, there were signs, and you did nothing.
Yeah.
It may have been overkill. It may have been literally overkill, but they're in the overkill business to protect themselves.
Yeah, you can criticize the UFC about a lot, and I mean, we're going to talk about the Aljamain Sterling situation. In this case, they actually, I think, regardless of the motives, they actually showed, I think, some compassion towards a fighter and said, we're going to make sure that you're healthy enough, and it's a fighter that they're not on good terms with. So I'm happy it all worked out. I'm happy it worked out for Mark Hunt and the UFC. They can move on. It sucks that he missed out on that main event payday, but I feel like in hindsight,
it wasn't a substantial derailment.
No, it wasn't.
It just wasn't. You can't argue that it was.
Sure. Let's talk about Saturday night. This past Saturday in Fresno, Brian Ortega submitted Cub Swanson. Biggest win of his career, a super impressive win. Maybe you can make a case for submission of the year or maybe on the short list. And he remains undefeated. And now here he is in that discussion. A new face at 145, a new force to be reckoned with. Does the UFC have something with Brian Ortega here? When you look at his story, when you look at, what he's been through, when you look at his post-fight interview, and instead of calling someone out or asking for a bonus, he's asking Dana White to work on a charity with him. Is this something, we were talking last week about a breath of fresh air, Max Holloway. Is this another breath of fresh air at 145?
Certainly is. I don't know if that's the same level of Max Holloway, because there's a certain level of accomplishment that he is. I think the most exciting thing for me, to be quite honest, and this will be a little bit different because it's not specific to Ortega, But what is really interesting to me at 135, UFC Fresno was this entire showcase of bantamweight. I think 6 fights on that card were bantamweight fights, and they were all bangers. I mean, for the most part, it was one that was kind of nubs, but you get the idea. But at featherweight, what you're finding is these guys, now there are different stages of development, but you're seeing guys like the Magomed Sharapovs, the Ortegas, the Holloways, again, different spaces. This new crop of youth at 145, pushing out all the old guard, I think that is incredibly exciting. If you're asking specifically about his star potential, I would say that his youth and his quirkiness work to his advantage, but it's hard for me to declare at this juncture that, oh, for sure, the stars are in his future. I don't know. We'll see.
Okay.
Well, the game is made up of so many different kinds of people, and it's impossible to sit here and say, like, well, we're looking for the specific kind of guy, because we've seen some guys who have a lot of edge, but they just don't have it that transfers over to an audience. We've seen guys who are do-gooders. It doesn't really sell for whatever reason. Fans don't get behind him. He kind of, I thought this was his coming out moment a little bit, because obviously the performance, you perform like that and you beat a guy a couple Swanson in your biggest fight in a main event. You're going to remember that, but at the same time, it was almost like the Rose Namajunas thing a little bit. You don't expect to hear that. It tells you something about the character of the guy, and now you have to wait to see kind of like how that generally transfers. Like right now, a lot of people watch that and they're like, oh wow, who knew? What a great guy, and they're behind it. But I think over the course of time, you got to find out if that's really what you're looking for in a fighter. It's weird. Sure. I appreciate him 100%. I thought that's always a breath of fresh air when somebody says something like that. You don't see it very often. It's a selfish business, not a selfless one.
Sure.
And he's going the opposite direction. So in some ways, he's kind of an iconoclast in the other way. Like he's being a good Samaritan, and in some ways that in the immediate moment, that's really cool to see. But how that kind of plays out over time,
does that sell pay-per-views, right?
Yeah, exactly.
At the end of the day.
Yeah, I was blown away. I was blown away by him on the mic when he finished Cub Swanson, and then it came time for him to talk. I was kind of expecting it to be, the typical, you look what I just did, I'm jumping to the front of the line, but it was the total opposite. And him talking about, working with kids, and him then switching off to giving respect to Frankie Edgar. This was just, I don't know that I've heard any fighter who has gone to that extent to be gracious. And then, just thinking about the fight, he was not getting the better of the stand-up, and yet, if not for the final horn, he would have choked out Cub earlier.
Yeah.
Cub survives that and then gets caught a second time, and like that, he's out. It was like just I think he's going to have to clean up his stand-up, but he's got certainly got some potential.
As people who work in the media business, I think we all love stories like this. There's so much there with Brian Ortega. I remember a year and a half ago, he almost drowned. You guys remember that story? He was surfing. Yeah, he almost drowned. He talked about it at 199 after he won. He was very close to drowning and losing his life, and that gave him a new perspective. I think we like that, and I think we talk about Rose Namajunas, but it remains to be seen whether or not these kinds of people and personalities actually make money for the company. So we could talk about, but I am a firm believer that it's the bad boys that make money, 100%. Right? So we could celebrate these people all we want, and I loved. I went to bed on Saturday night, or it was early Sunday morning at that point. I think it was like 4 a.m. by the time that damn show was over. But I went to bed thinking, like, man, Brian Ortega, what a great human being. Yeah. Like, humanity is nice,
But the new ownership is he's still the new ownership. And the ownership that's been there for quite a while now is an entertainment company working with celebrities in that world who, oftentimes you see, this celebrity, that celebrity being lauded for working with this charity or that. They're kind of very familiar with that kind of a mindset, probably more so than they are familiar with and comfortable with the mindset of the fighter, the fighter that we're used to seeing.
Sure, does that sell pay-per-views?
So
it's different when you have The Rock.
But this guy might be a guy who fits in much better, just like Rose, fits in much better with the mindset of the people who run the company, and maybe they'll find ways to sell them.
Maybe. In the long run, I feel like people side with taboo and vice and greed. It's whatever it is. Movies have survived. every form of entertainment goes
politics.
Politics. All of it. I feel like people are going in the long haul. That's what people want. For whatever reason, that's what they want. So what he's doing is great, but polite in the long haul, like polite, Frankie, you first, by all means, that sort of thing. It'll go so far, but I can't imagine in the fight game him staying, him
Although it worked for GSP, right? Who was more polite than him?
There's always room for Captain Canada or Captain America, but there's not room for 2 or 3.
Right,
Okay,
and also, like, for GSP, the sport needed the consummate professional when he was doing this. I mean, I felt like he was that one guy there. Hey, wait a minute, look, he doesn't look like a fighter. He's not crazy.
Sure.
You know, at the
Wearing a
moment,
suit.
exactly, he's wearing a suit. This is a professional. Let's present him. And I think that he benefited by being the first guy, basically, to be like that, the first big star to be like that in MMA.
Okay.
Justin Wren has done an I mean, the guy's like Mother Teresa who can just bang your brains out. It's crazy. So, but and I certainly think that has raised his profile to a degree. But I don't know that it's turned him into anything other than a guy as a talented heavyweight fighter who does an incredible amount of very serious charity work for a group terribly in need. It hasn't. GSP is more just this avatar for professionalism. Yeah. 2 different kinds of things.
So I want to ask you guys about free agency, because on the flip side of that story is Cub Swanson, who rolled the dice, who said, I should be getting title shots, this and that. I'm going to play out the contract, and it goes horribly wrong. And kudos to him for owning up to it. And in his post-fight interview, he was like, I if you want to say I can't win the big one, maybe you're right at this point. I don't know what to make of it all. And so, we like to talk about free agency. Certainly last year it was a hot topic. I still don't feel like that's the right word for what we have in MMA, because there's really only one other option. I mean, you have the odd guy who goes to ONE or Ryzen, but it's really like, oh, does Bellator want me? Great. If not, I'm probably going back to the UFC. And so now here you have Cub, who rolls the dice, and it doesn't work out. And you compare it to free agency in other sports. Like, let's say I'm, the 6th man on the Timberwolves, and I'm going to, become a free agent. If I have, if I have an off year, okay, I had 82 games to kind of make it right. Cub Swanson had 10 minutes, and the whole thing changes. He loses all his leverage. He's no longer a title contender. Bellator may think, he's washed up, or, you just lost. And so do we rethink this now? Like, if you're a fighter, Brian Ortega has 1 fight left on his contract. Does he fight this out, or do we go back to the old model where, like, maybe the risk far outweighs the reward here at this point? Because so much could go wrong in that 1 fight.
Look, everyone likes to say, it's a nice thing to say, right? Bet on yourself to win. Sometimes yourself is going to let yourself down. Sometimes you're going to lose. You're just going to lose. And look, there's a lot of, if you're a Cub, the only thing you can really ask yourself in that scenario was, in taking the Brian Ortega fight, was that an appropriate fight to take given your needs? I actually think that it was. And was that a rational bet? It was. That was a very rational bet. Cub, but by the way, did not look bad. He actually looked pretty good, especially in the stand-up. If you go back and you watch round 2, a lot of the early clinching that Ortega was doing was the function of the fact that some of those punches from Swanson, who, by the way, is not a soft hitter, they were getting to sneak around the gloves and up through the chin. He was touching him. I don't know that Ortega had a whole lot for him after that point if it had stayed on the feet. But I'm just saying this. You look at all the scenarios where Max Holloway fights out his contract, winning against Jose Aldo. Super smart. Oh, my God, what a genius. You look at another one like Gard Mousasi, goes to Bellator, gets a very nice contract. But then there are cases like this, too. All you can do, in my judgment, is, yes, it'd be nice if there was some kind of union or more official transition out of something like this. But I would say all you can do is, did Cub Swanson make a rational, intelligent bet? Yes, but it's a bet. There are no guarantees.
And, I mean, his leverage is still there to an extent, because, I mean, he had won 4 in a row. I mean, he had a fight of the year candidate against Ho Choi, right, in Toronto. And then he, he main evented the last 2 cards he was on there, fight nights. But, I mean, he's a big enough name. He's been around. He's fought such a who's who, and he's still winning at such a clip. And like you said, I thought he looked pretty good in the fight, in the stand-up and everything else. So, I mean, it's more, I feel like that particular fight was more of an Ortega, like, wow, look how good he is, rather than, oh, look how far Cub has fallen, that type of thing. So I feel like it'd be interesting to see what happens to him, because obviously Rory McDonald, I don't know who you could compare, but like Rory McDonald had lost a couple fights. He gambled on himself too, right? And Bellator still snapped him up. And I feel like if Cub Swanson wins a Bellator, that would be a big deal. And I don't know if it would be like, I thought Rory was a bigger deal. Some of the guys who go over there, but I still think it would be a big enough deal. And the UFC could use guys like that. I mean, even if he is a gatekeeper, he's still that test for a guy like Ortega to have to get through to get to where he's going. I mean, and I feel like he's going to bat back. He can still bat back a lot of guys from getting to that space. So people hate that word gatekeeper, but he could be a really good one.
Litmus test.
Yeah, there you go. That's
more. positive.
And he still could get back up there. We're just talking about this, the structureless, how this thing works. He could still get up there for a title shot.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with these guys. I don't think that his stock took a nosedive by any means. I thought that he fought well. I thought he was the better stand-up fighter. But basically, he essentially let himself get submitted twice. I mean, the first time he was gonna lose that fight. But I guess it's hard to say. Maybe he knew that there was 10 seconds ago, and he was not as concerned that he was going to get choked out that quickly. But still, I mean, he has to clean that up.
I was going to say that Michael Bisping is a classic example of a guy who, each time he'd lose to like kind of a bigger name, we think, well, that's probably it for Michael Bisping. And then here he'd come again. A few fights later, he would be back there. Cub's kind of in that spot.
He's had the same career. Almost.
Exactly, because he's, you look at the guys who lost to Holloway, Edgar, and now Ortega, which we don't know. We have to wait and see kind of how he plays out. But they're no slouches, man. Over the last few years, he's beat just about everybody else. I mean, I think has beat everybody else, and he's looked great in doing it. So.
He's got, what, 4 losses? Aldo, Pulver, then Edgar, and then Holloway, right?
Yeah, and then Ortega now.
And Ortega. I mean, he's not losing to chumps.
No.
Right.
He's losing to good fighters.
Very
And
reminiscent.
he's not getting outclassed. I mean, he's not getting outclassed in these fights. So
Yeah.
Only thing was, I'm sure you spoke to him. I've spoken to him as well, and his point was prior to the fight, it was, this is probably going to be not necessarily the last contract, but I'm definitely like, this is where I'm not going to make more money in my career than I am about to make if I win this fight.
Yeah.
He really wanted a big pay increase. I do think that will take some kind of a hit, which makes me feel a little bit for him.
I've been dying to ask you guys about this. I'm very excited about this topic.
You are passionate about this. I know exactly where you're headed.
I'm very passionate about what happened.
all right, see you later.
After the Marlon Moraes, Aljamain Sterling fight, because look, we all know that this sport is brutal, it's violent, all that stuff. We know this, right? But it's rare in this sport that there's a vicious knockout, a vicious ending, and there's no sort of conclusion to it all. And what I mean by that is Francis Ngannou knocks, Alistair Overeem's head off. If you watch the broadcast, there's a moment there where Overeem goes up to him and hugs him, and there's some sort of finality to it all. That wasn't the case on Saturday night. Marlon Moraes knocks out Aljamain Sterling with a vicious knee. It lands flush, even though that wasn't his original intent, but it was a beautiful finish. And you see Sterling go down, you see him stiff as a board. And then they go to commercial, and then they come back, and it's clear that it's not the typical, stand in the middle of the octagon next to your opponent, referee in the middle, raise the hand, do the interview, they embrace whatever. He's off to the side. And it's clear that Marlon Moraes is very concerned about Aljamain. It's clear that he's looking at him. Aljamain's name is not mentioned. He is not shown. And I just felt it was very cold-hearted. I felt that it was somewhat callous. I felt that it was somewhat gutless to not even show the man on camera, or at the very least, give us an update on how he's doing, or at the very least say, all right, there's a situation where he's been carted out because he was stretchered out, and we'll give you an update at some point, time permitting, or at the very least on the post-fight show, right? There's plenty of opportunities to give us some kind of update. And oh, by the way, Aljamain did get up backstage, did go to the hospital, was clear to go home, all that stuff and more. And I just feel like in 2017, as a sports viewer, we need that update. You can't just brush this under the rug. You can't just say, all right, here's this amazing knockout, all's well and good, we don't care about, what happened to this guy. For example, a week prior in the NFL, there was a horrific accident with a Pittsburgh Steelers player, and they showed him getting carted out. They updated us. I feel like the audience needs to know about this. Of course, the difference is the UFC is controlling the broadcast, the NFL isn't controlling the CBS broadcast. They are in the business of trying to make this the prettiest product possible. But I feel like we're smart enough in 2017 to where, you don't have to glorify by putting a camera right in his face as he's being carted out. But could you at least tell us that, yes, there is a situation, he's under supervision, he is going to the back, something like that. Am I asking for too much? Because a lot of the replies that I got were like, oh, you're just looking for a story, you're just looking to complain. Like, really? Or am I just a human being who just saw a man, get knocked out brutally and he's stiff as a board, and now I'm noticing that you're not even referencing him or showing him on camera? That seems a little weird. Like, it seems like something's going on here. How do you guys feel about all this?
Wow, not as strongly as you.
Oh, man, it drove me nuts. It put such a bad taste in my mouth.
I would say that, look, I think you really hit on what the central issue is here. There are very good fighters turned analysts on Fox. Let's be very clear about that, or Fox Sports 1, pardon me. There's a lot of good people who work there. This is not to say that this is a place full of incompetence. That's not what I'm suggesting. And in negotiation, I don't know what's going to happen with the future of UFC and Fox, but let's be absolutely clear about this. With a few editorial exceptions that have stood out, generally speaking, when the UFC says jump, Fox has been saying how high. And I believe that if you had a different network or a different kind of firewall between said network and the UFC, you might actually get to your point like you do with the NFL. Now that you would get at least some kind of a medical update. Let's go to Megan O'Leary in the back, or Laura Sanko, or some kind of identification about this happened. Here's what we know. We'll keep you posted as we get information. I do think that you see now this blue thing that comes out on the NFL sidelines. Have you seen that?
Yeah.
The little tent. These guys are entitled in a moment of, not despair exactly, but of deep distress. They are entitled to some privacy. I don't need to take a look at him.
I couldn't agree more.
I do think that a good network would take it upon themselves as a priority to give medical updates.
There's a big difference between showing him and completely ignoring him. There's a huge gap between them.
You ask us before a fight. The UFC asks us to care about these fighters. Like they're presenting these people as human beings. They're telling you their backstories or whatever. They're telling their stories of these fighters. You can't then, in a moment of concern like that, because everybody's had the exact same thought, like just act like it didn't happen. That is a problem. They don't have to show a guy being loaded onto a cart. I get that, because unlike in the NFL, I know that it's a collision sport. NFL is a collision sport. So you're going to have that type of thing. Everybody knows that. This is, people inflicting harm on each other. So you don't want to show that stuff. I get it, but you need to update it. You have to say something. It's such an elephant in the room moment when you see a guy go down like that. You can see the tight shot because you know he's being tended to. There's a press contingency always rings. Those people are always, they're on Twitter and they're saying like, hey, he's still out. This is scary stuff. And so you're getting all that stuff basically from people who are witnessing it, but nothing from the telecast. It just feels wrong. I feel like, if you ask us to care going in, you have to maintain that going out. You have to give us some kind of humanity. That piece of humanity you have to keep in place.
Yeah, I agree with you guys entirely. I think that this is a different time we're living in. I certainly remember watching NFL broadcasts, and you hear about a guy getting his bell rung. We'll see if he's going to come back in the game. That was kind of the way it always was. And then at some point, maybe you'd hear, some guy would leave the game and you wouldn't hear much about it. It was almost like the UFC thing. But nowadays you watch a game, and even though they do take the person to the medical tent, oftentimes if there's an injury and it looks like it's going to be a while, they go to commercial. They don't want to show that. But sometimes they come back and the guy's still there. And then they cart them off and they cheer. But we always do get later on, let's go down to the sideline and talk to, so-and-so. And then Pam Oliver's going to, I just talked to somebody who's one of the coaches, one of the medical staff of this team, and they give us a little bit of an update. It's not much, but it's just a little bit. He's been taken to the hospital for observation. Usually it's kind of inconsequential information, but it just gives you that little bit of context, because essentially on Saturday night, we saw the knockout. Then we basically saw Marlon Moraes getting his arm raised with the referee and a complete absence. It was as though Aljamain Sterling had disappeared from the arena.
It's like Marlon is basically concerned.
He was more concerned,
I know.
yeah.
And that just feeds into it.
I'm sorry for demanding more, but I mean, a couple weeks ago, Kristaps Porzingis, the god of all gods, his ankle literally went 90 degrees, and my life felt like it was over. I was so sad about this. I thought his ankle broke. I was devastated. And so I'm refreshing Twitter. I'm watching the broadcast for some kind of update. And there it is, New York Knicks PR feed. Kristaps Porzingis, MRI, scheduled for tomorrow. X-rays negative. He's available to return. Thank the Lord. Is it asking for too much? Even the Twitter feed to give us an update on this guy?
Can I get
exactly right?
Is
something
from someone in the company? To me, this isn't pro wrestling. And there was a time when this was a 2-hour broadcast on Spike TV, and it was very pro wrestling-esque, right? It was just a little show. We're going to show you what we want to show you. But now we're acting like a sports league. Now we've got a pre-fight show and a post-fight show and a backstage reporter. This is a sports broadcast, right? On Fox Sports, all this stuff. Act like a sports broadcast.
But in their defense, how are they supposed
sports entity.
In their defense, how are they supposed to squeeze the updates into the?
I know there's no time. There's no time.
There is no fat on those broadcasts.
There's no time.
It's lean.
I don't know. Maybe it's like I love sports media and I consume so much of it, and I like to compare.
I don't think a lot of MMA fans watch sports.
I was shocked at the responses.
They have no frame of reference.
The only people I was getting messages like the only people who care about this are his family. Like, get off your high horse or stop trying to stir the pot. I'm like,
these
really?
are people living in a van down by the river.
I don't get it. I don't.
If your reaction is, well, we can have a debate about what kind of information does a television network in a moment of distress? What do they owe the public? There's a legitimate debate to be had about that. But if your response is, get off your high horse, I mean, this is a person.
And guess what?
This isn't.
There was a happy ending. He was fine backstage.
Well, fine is a relative word, but yes.
Even more reason to say, oh, by the way, we know that there was a vicious knockout, but good news to report. He's fine. He's walking around. 100%. Nothing to see
just
here,
that,
right? It's not common. I'm not saying, it's not common that guys are getting carted out of the octagon.
But he had a backboard.
Yeah. I mean, that's a big deal.
That's a huge deal.
That is a very big deal. So that's my 2 cents on all that.
Not to over-dramatize it, but the last time I was at an event where they had a backboard, I believe it was Dada 5000. And, that was a very touch-and-go moment there as well.
That's worse. Bellator didn't mention that one either. So.
Right. Well, I mean...
But we did get an update on...
If UFC's not going to do it, you can't expect Bellator to do it.
Although, again, as I was saying earlier, like the Bellator broadcast is more of that old school, like Spike broadcast from, 2009. They do have a sideline reporter, Jen Brown, but she's more of a, here's what's coming up on the schedule. But I just think in 2007, we should demand more from our product. 2017, yes, of course. Okay, let me ask you guys about Eddie Alvarez quickly here, because I think that everyone after that fight against Justin Gaethje, everyone said, all right, it's time now to settle the score with Dustin Poirier. He appears to have no interest in this fight. Is this a mistake on Eddie's part? Like, I feel like Eddie has done such a phenomenal job of reinventing himself after the Conor fight. Like, that could have killed him, right? I mean, I think in many respects, the Conor loss has hurt Aldo's legacy, right? But like a year later, here's Eddie, and he's beloved, maybe even more so than he ever was as champion. But yet he's saying no to this fight, and it's a fight that everyone loved, and it ended controversially and inconclusively. Is this a bad look on his part?
Yes, but only because he's kind of talking out of both sides of his mouth on this thing. Because basically he's saying, like, hey, I forget it, the titles don't really mean anything. So what is he working? Why is it a step backwards? If the titles don't mean anything, what difference does it make who you fight? If the guy's going to bring it to you, isn't that what you want? Is the most violent man or whatever the award is? I'm like, if that's what you want, well, Dustin Poirier has already shown you once that he's going to give you that kind of fight. So in my mind, I'm like, which is it? Do you want to fight that kind of fight, or are you really? Do you have to read between the lines and understand that you're trying to get back to a title fight.
Right.
So it's really just Eddie needs to figure out exactly what he wants. But ultimately, man, I think just about anybody hardcore, mostly fans within the niche that watch that fight want to see that again. I can't imagine that nobody, we want that sense of resolution. The fight was really good. They were going back and forth. I know you don't really like a brawl, but it had a lot of...
it was less of a brawl.
It was less of a brawl. The thing is, you had the narrative switching, like one guy's getting hurt and the next guy's in it. That's the kind of fight people love. And if that's his new, MO, like he's going to be this most violent man, that's the perfect fight for him. It's the perfect setup.
I mean, I hear what you guys are saying. I guess I would reserve judgment until we see where he actually does go. Because, one thing that I've always thought about Eddie Alvarez is that anytime I've heard him interviewed or if I've talked to him, he always talks about, how I want to make some money for my family. He's one of those guys. I mean, a lot of these guys, obviously, they're prize fighters. They all want to make money. But that's something that he has always consciously talked about. And so I just wonder whether this is something where he says, this is a fight that everybody wants. So I'm gonna sort of push away from it a little bit and see whether maybe I'll get a little more money on it. So if that's not the play, if he's really thinking about a different fight, then I agree with you that it's ultimately that would be the wrong thing. But I could sort of see him just kind of being a businessman here.
And by the way, Luke, worth noting, he has one fight left on his contract as well. So maybe there is something to him being a businessman.
Right. I think that is exactly what it is. I mean, look, ever since that fight happened, Dustin Poirier, from the day afterwards, has been clamoring for a rematch. Steady. Eddie Alvarez never has. That should tell you something. I don't think any of these guys, do I think Eddie Alvarez is afraid of Dustin Poirier? I certainly do not. But, and he could beat him very well. But I think after that fight was over, they thought and they were like, I think Dustin felt like that was going to go his way. And I'm not sure Eddie did. And now that he has one fight left on his contract, why do you want to do it again with a guy who you feel like might just be a bad matchup for you? So again, I don't think it's like, Eddie Alvarez is afraid of Dustin Poirier. Not even a little bit, but making a calculated business move. I think he just feels like that wouldn't, the chances of that going as well for me aren't as strong as it is for maybe somebody else who also has a big name. I think he's waiting for that to emerge.
Interesting. I do think your point is also worth noting as well, because the violent man thing has really stuck. And it's a lot of fun, and fans are getting
treating it with some legitimacy,
Well, I mean, fans love that stuff. Like, I'm just going to go out there and I'm going to guarantee you a firefight. And here, I mean, and by the way, they're really close to each other in the rankings. I mean, I think they're like one spot.
It's the fight that should happen. Dustin Poirier is like totally right about this.
Yeah.
There is something unresolved about it. It was awesome. And Poirier at UFC Norfolk being like, I beat him. I'm gonna beat the winner of Alvarez-Gaethje. I'm gonna fight for a title. There's something so manifest about that I feel like Eddie's kind of denying history here a little bit.
Yeah, it's a rivalry. Like, it's, you know, we tend to see a lot of rivalries at the top, you know, like, oh man, I really want to see, or not rivalries, but where it feels like guys are coming together. And Ngannou Miocic, I mean, the UFC didn't have to think twice about that. It just happened, right?
Yeah.
And that's why I was so fired up about Perry and Till. It's like, this just happened. Yeah. We must see it. And I feel like we must see this. Like, it just happened. Like give us what we want, type of thing.
Anders and Machida.
Anders and Machida. That's the fight we want. Which is an interesting fight. We can talk about that closer to that one. I want to ask you guys about Mackenzie Dern. She improved to 5-0 last week. She won her Invicta debut.
Made weight.
She made weight at 115. And the UFC, as we always say, they're in need of stars, of marketable personalities, all that stuff and more. And they're certainly looking for them in the women's division, especially with Ronda Rousey leaving. And they have some with Rose and Joanna, I think, is still very much a marketable fighter and a potential, you know, future champion once again as well. I want to ask you guys about Mackenzie's ceiling. And Luke, I'll start with you here because I know you've been watching her for quite some time. Mm-hmm. 5 fights in. Do you see potential here? Can she be, you know, a major player in the UFC? And the UFC has her in their training camp. Like, they've been paying her. And now she's in Invicta. Mm-hmm. Is it time to just bring her over to the UFC? Because, let's be honest, UFC caliber doesn't mean what it once did.
No, it doesn't.
So you could give her 2 and 3 opponents in the UFC. Should you basically profit from her at this point as opposed to giving her to other organizations? Or is it better to, you know, wait to put her in that deep end?
I would wait.
You would wait.
I would wait.
Why?
I didn't. I thought 2 fights ago she was showing real improvement. And look, you can't expect. We're so accustomed to these elite fighters who like fight over fight. They're like dramatically better. But that's it. Not everyone has this exponential curve. Sometimes it's all over the place, almost like a heartbeat. And look, she's showing improvement. But I would be. I think that they tried something with Paige Van Zandt where they were trying to push her before she was really ready. It's not to say she can't fight, but I don't know that she can beat any of the elite or certainly not any kind of sustained campaign. And that really is going to limit whatever star potential there is, because if you're just not winning those big fights, what are you really doing? So there's a bit of a problem there. So with Mackenzie Dern, what is her ceiling? The ceiling, you still want to hold on to at least. There's no reason to discard the idea at this point that she couldn't be a champion. There's no reason to discard that. However, a couple of problems. Number one, she just walks right into pockets and eats jabs constantly. Her movement's a little predictable. Her first round and second round takedown attempts, not all that successful. She usually takes a couple of tries to get somebody down. They're getting better each time. And of course, once she gets you on the floor, it's, you know, I mean, this is a matter of procedure for her. I'm merely saying it would be, if the UFC is trying to find the next generation of stars, find somebody you can bank on who you know can fight. Find somebody who's got the requisite experience. And if Mackenzie Dern, 1 or 2 more fights in Invicta, then we'll send her up. But right now, too early.
I mean, we're sitting here talking about her fighting in Invicta. They don't really need to rush anything because the bottom line is we see her coming, right? So you give her more experience. You let her kind of come out, escalate naturally because honestly, I agree with you. I haven't watched her as closely as you have, but I feel like she would get carved up by certain names in that division. So you certainly wouldn't want to see her thrown into that right away. And, you know, you could, like you said, you could probably bring her to the UFC and have her fight some lesser talent. But to me, she's just going to be lost then in your cards, you know, that just happened so much. She gets a better spotlight right now with Invicta. People see her coming. I feel like she was the whole reason I tuned in to check out that fight card. And I feel like that's what you want. It's whether you're on, you know what I mean? Like if you're still getting your star power is growing as you're heading towards the UFC, it works the same way. But I think that she still needs more experience ultimately. And I mean, I'm all about the slow escalation on somebody with that kind of experience on, especially because she could be a star, given her, you know, her Brazil and American, you know, just her everything that she offers the sport. Like she could be a star, but I feel like they have to bring her up slow. And Invicta's the perfect place for her right now.
Yeah, I mean, if the whole idea, if the UFC's vision for Invicta, their relationship with Invicta is as kind of a developmental organization to develop talent, well, develop the talent. She's a perfect example of somebody who's at an extremely high level in one aspect of MMA and not at a high level in others. So this is really a great opportunity to develop her. And I think they'll know when it's time by her results. I think, yeah, she's 5-0, but she's not blowing anybody's doors off. She's not going out there, and doing the Ronda Rousey, 32 seconds down, armbar, finished. If she starts doing that to some of these women, or she starts knocking some people out, or doing some things, knocking them down with punches, and then choking them out or submitting them, that's a whole other level. But I think our last two wins were like third rounds, or at least maybe the 2 of the last 3 were third rounds. So it's taken her some time to get where she needs to be.
Also, remember something. She had forgive me, either her 2015 or her 2016 campaign, where she won almost everything on the grappling circuit, right? She won Worlds. She won, I don't know if she did the Brasileiros, but I think she won European. She won like so many tournaments. She beat the who's who, with the exception of like Gabby Garcia, right? She couldn't beat her, but everyone else got torn to pieces. And then the last year, she's been absolutely, relative to that previous campaign, terrible. It was only after losing substantially in jiu-jitsu that she was like, okay, I need to just focus on MMA.
Yeah.
She was trying to do both. She's only now just past that. Right. So in terms of getting her ready for like hardcore elite level MMA, there's another level of development she has to reach.
Okay. A name to watch in 2018. Last quick thing before we move over to After the Beat. A nice little 4-pack main card from balmy Winnipeg this Saturday on Fox. Nothing better than the Fox cards, 8 to 10 p.m.
Oh, God.
Stretches a little bit past 10.
Oh,
That's
it's
cool.
the
I
best.
can live with it.
It's the best.
Yeah, it's a little Kurt Manifest sighting.
And no face the pain.
Oh, it's just, there's so much to love. There's so much to love. I hope the Fox deal never ends just for those cards 4 times a year. Main event is RDA versus Robbie Lawler. A great main event, an important one in the welterweight division. Just want to ask you all, what's at stake here? Do you really believe that the winner of this fight is going to fight Tyron Woodley? Or, Covington certainly has a case. There, with Woodley getting that shoulder surgery, there could be guys that emerge. Mike Perry's on the card. He's a fun guy. There's Darren Till making some noise. Kamaru Usman's returning to action. Do you guys believe that the winner of this fight will get a title shot? Because that has not been outright said. You're laughing. You don't seem to believe it.
Well, I mean, we've spent this whole show saying that's unpredictable. We don't know what's going to happen.
Okay.
But the bottom line is, I feel like there's being on major Fox like this, it's a great platform for somebody to make a big statement. And obviously, everybody knows what Robbie Lawler can do. I feel like if RDA does that to Robbie Lawler, I don't know how you can make a bigger statement than that on a national TV to get a title shot.
Right.
So I feel like, in one way, if it's RDA, I feel like that, and also because Lawler has already lost to Woodley, I don't know if they'd be very eager to put that back together, but I would say RDA, if he's able to do something really, really emphatic, that would probably position him maybe in that pole position to get that shot. But
I disagree.
Yeah? You think so?
I think it's the other way. I think they're waiting for Lawler to win.
Really?
I think if Lawler gets a win, they want to do that rematch.
Interesting.
For sure, that's what they want to do. Not to say, you might be right. I mean, like, if RDA goes out there and, let's say, blows the doors off Robbie Lawler, this would be one of those, eureka moments where you're like, this is the guy.
You have to.
But I think they're kind of leaning in a direction where let's see if we can get Lawler versus Woodley, too.
And I'm wondering if Woodley wants that fight, if he wants to go through that whole thing.
I think he wants that more than he wants Colby Covington.
Yeah, I think he's made it very
whether or
clear.
not that's the right call is
Sure.
debatable, but I get the feeling that he'd rather fight Lawler than Covington.
Okay, Jeff.
Either one, both of these guys who are fighting in the main event on Saturday have worn UFC belts, and I think that kind of just automatically gives you a little more gravitas than Covington or any of the other guys who are coming up. Those guys are rising up, and certainly Covington beating Demian Maia was, that's a statement victory, but. Going out and beating another guy who was a UFC champion, I think that the winner of this fight, either way, I do feel like
you're probably right, ultimately, because when you think about
that he's right.
When you think about
it's a whole show without admitting he's right. Come on.
When you think about Lawler, I feel like the UFC really does love Lawler. Like when he was champion, I felt like he was always with Dana always at the UFC events. They were trotting him around, almost like they did Chuck Liddell. He was always in the crowd. They just love him. So. Thinking back on him, like maybe they really do want Lawler.
RDA's had great success in this spot. 3 years ago this week, he beat Nate Diaz on Big Fox. 2 years ago this week, he beat Donald Cerrone in the main event as lightweight champion. So he's had great success. I'm just waiting for Mike Perry to do something special and steal everyone's momentum. Everyone's momentum.
Wow. Kids got momentum.
Perry versus Ponzinibbio.
Yeah.
That is
Can't miss.
Fantastic. Misha Serkinov against Glover Teixeira and Ricardo Lamas not fighting Jose Aldo, getting Josh Emmett.
Tough fight.
Instead. Yeah, very tough fight.
Super tough fight.
Almost a lose-lose in the sense that not the name, but
that's
very tough.
Next guy
but he
gets
gets
by him, huh?
Yeah. Lamas does have a loss to Max Holloway, which makes it interesting. But yes, certainly a good night of fights coming up in Winnipeg on Saturday. All right, so this is what we're going to do now. We're going to go to Twitter right now, exclusively on Twitter. You know the drill. You've been sending us questions using the hashtag the MMA Beat, guys. I'm told best set of questions we've ever had coming up. Best set of questions.
You know what?
Is that a tease?
I don't believe you.
And guess what? Last week, phenomenal set of questions.
They were good.
Thought.
They were good.
Maybe the greatest moment in the history of the long storied history of After the Beat.
You talk about alcohol, it's always going to...
I think at best you'd be most embarrassing, probably.
I'm told these are even better. So what you need to do is go exclusively on Twitter right now. You see the address right over there. We'll be answering your questions for the next 25 to 30 minutes. Go over there right now. After the MMA Beat. That's what we call it. It's our favorite segment of the day, and it starts right now.